I've had many experiences, but have never actually seen a ghost. I do believe in them, though. I'm afraid that one day I might see one. This experience of mine happened when I was 5 years old and my sister was 9. It was while we were living in our old house. I may have been young, but I remember this experience. One day, my parents went to a garage sale and bought 2 porcelain dolls. A blonde doll in a green dress and a brunette in a pink dress. They bought these dolls for me and my sister. The brunette was mine, and the blonde was my sister's. I loved my doll, so I put her away to keep her from getting damaged. My doll was perfectly harmless. My sister's doll, well, she wasn't innocent at all. My sister had put her doll on display up in her room. When it was time for us to go to bed, she turned her lights off and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to hear her yelling out for our mother. Mom rushed into her room and asked what was wrong. I clearly heard what my sister said, considering our rooms were right next to each other. She said, "There was a man in my room saying mean things." This had absolutely terrified her, and to this day she hasn't told us what the man said. Mom comforted her and told her to tell the man to go away if he came back. This wasn't the last creepy thing my sister experienced. After that night, my sister moved the doll into another room because of the experience. Night came once again, and again we had to go to bed. I woke once more to my sister crying out for our mother. Again, Mom came rushing into her room, as did I. We asked her what was wrong. She said, "The creepy man came back." Mom comforted my sister as she had before. My sister then noticed that the doll had returned to her room. She was laying on the floor. Being the Supernatural TV show trash we were, my mother put salt in my sister's room, which was probably a bad idea. The next day, we packed the doll away and didn't touch it for weeks. A month later, my brother said he saw a little girl in his room at night, and he asked if it was me or my sister. Of course, it wasn't. My brother was cleaning out his room, and he found the doll under his bed. We all freaked out, considering my sister's experiences with that doll. Again, being the supernatural trash we were, my brother burned the doll. After another month, we found her foot in our cabinet drawer, which was super freaky because we had burned her. We threw the foot in the trash, hoping that would be the last of it. A year later, we moved into our current house. We had been in the house for 2 years. One day, while we were sorting out our junk and furniture, we found the shoe and a lock of the doll's blonde hair. Again, we burned her. We haven't found any pieces of the doll since then. When I was a child, I always enjoyed playing with my dollies, as many young girls do. Now, at the age of 16, I wish I could have found out more about my experience. Maybe get some kind of explanation as to why it happened to me. I don't remember much from my primary school years, but these memories are as clear to me as if they had happened yesterday. There was a jumble sale that took place in the hall of my primary school around 2007 when I was about 8. There were a lot of unwanted toys that had been brought in by children's parents and by the children themselves, none of which caught my eye. I was never a lover of shiny, new-looking toys, which was what the majority of them were. After a good rummage through the piles of items, I eventually stumbled across a ragged-looking doll. The doll wasn't porcelain or made of any kind of plastic material. Instead, it was a soft crochet doll that looked fairly mistreated and had a lot of the stitches torn from its mouth and dress. I was thrilled that I had found another doll to add to my collection. At the time, I had no suspicions about the doll being abnormal in any way, undoubtedly because of my naivety at that age. When I got home from school that day, I placed the doll on my bed. For the first couple weeks or so, nothing out of the ordinary happened. As I began to collect more and more toys, I gradually started to remove toys that had been on my bed for some time. Even Lucy, the doll. She was my favorite at the time, but I eventually moved her to a large wooden box that I kept a lot of my other stuffed toys in. That night, I settled down with a Disney video. As I was drifting off to sleep, I noticed something poking out from the top of my toy box just to the right of my bed. It was Lucy. She seemed to stand on both of her legs, arms at her sides. She wore an unusual facial expression that was unoriginal to the doll. It almost looked like she was smirking. I didn't feel threatened by the doll, and I continued to stare at her for a few seconds. That is, until she seemed to physically jump from one side of the box to the other. I rushed to the box, only to find Lucy laid flat at the top of the pile, motionless. Since then, I have moved in with my grandma and have no recollection of the doll's whereabouts, but I suspect it may be somewhere within my mom's house. My name is Jofranka, and I am married to my husband Jurg. He's Russian and moved to America when he was 17 in hopes of joining the army. He later decided to become an accountant. Both of my parents moved from Germany a week before I was born. My life was fairly quiet. I have 5 amazing children: Luminista, Sergei, Orva, Burian, and Odile. We live in Ohio, in a relatively small community with a vast variety of European ethnicities. I've always been a small town kind of girl, so I found this new home extremely accepting. My first paranormal experience started around the time my husband got his new job. It was at a small accounting agency on the outskirts of town in what we small town folks like to call the big city. My family had just moved to Ohio from Washington State, and the kids were adapting quite well to their new school. About a week into the move, I was reading a book in the very small alone time I have, between kissing my husband goodbye and picking up my kids from the glorious invention called school. I heard a clamor in the laundry room, and I thought that a picture that Jurg hung up must have fallen. He isn't exactly a handyman. But I started to doubt that theory, as the noise sounded more metallic. When I entered the room to investigate, I didn't see anything on the floor but a doll. One of those old Victorian dolls. It was cloth with a sewn dress and yarn hair. I automatically assumed it was one of Odile's, since she's an avid collector of dolls, no matter what kind. I returned it to her room and thought nothing more of it. The week after that, when the children were at school, I heard another noise. This one was a knocking at the door. What struck me as odd is it was not the front door or even the back one. It was coming from inside of Odile's room. My immediate thought was that Luminista had tried to skip school again and had gotten herself locked in. Surely she just needed to use the restroom. However, when I opened the door, I didn't see Luminista, or any of my children for that matter. The only thing out of place was that Odile's doll was on her bed instead of the dresser where I had left it. This didn't strike me as odd, though. I just assumed that Odile had been playing with it and hadn't returned it to its proper spot, meaning that she would be given a stern talking to after school. I forgot to talk to my daughter, though. That was the day Jurg came home and told me that he'd lost his job. It was also the day that he told me he was leaving me, right in front of the children. I flew into my bedroom in a hysterical fit. Upon entering, my foot caught something and I fell to the floor. I had slipped on one of Jurg's collared shirts. I went to throw it at the window in a blind fit of rage. I stopped mid-motion to gasp in horror as the doll had mysteriously moved itself from Odile's room to my windowsill. But at the time, I was too busy to do anything about it. Now, here is where my story started getting far too unsettling for me. Sergei was at soccer practice, Orva was at violin practice, and Luminista was at a friend's house, which left me with Burian and Odile. The two were playing in Odile's room when I heard the phone frantically ringing. I ran to the kitchen to pick it up before the line went dead, and that's when I realized that the phone wasn't ringing. I stopped dead in my tracks. I could feel the color draining from my face as I slowly trudged towards the sound. As I opened Odile's door, the noise got louder. "Gosh, Mommy, pick up the phone, would you?" I remember Odile saying. She pointed her head to where the phone was laying. I remember dragging myself to Odile's bed, but not being able to pick the phone up despite the ringing. This is because my family only has one phone that always stays in the kitchen. Always. The phone is a cord phone attached to the wall. This was a completely different phone. It was the one I used to have as a teenager that should have taken its rightful place in my parents' garage down in Florida. You must remember that I have never believed in ghosts or the paranormal or whatever you'd like to call it, but the first chance I got, I let my best friend Chrissy watch the kids as I drove all the way down to my folks' house. When my parents got me to sit down on the couch and tell my story, I just burst into tears. What doll was it again? My mother had asked me. I described the type of fabric the dress was made of and the color of the yarn the hair was. "You mean this doll?" my mother said. She showed me a picture from a box my father had brought down from the attic. It was me at age 7 holding the exact same doll, posing goofily with my older brother Jim and my 2 little twin sisters Julie and Carter. Behind us was a man I didn't recognize. I remember my father cursing and snatching the picture from my mother's hands. He said something along the lines of, "Well, gosh darn it, Pansy, looky who it is right here." My mother said, "Well, I'll be, Cheslov." At that point, I was hysterical and just begged them to tell me what was going on. My father asked if I knew who the man in the picture was, and I said no. My father went on to explain that it was my Uncle Ben who was making a funny face behind the four of us. I don't have an Uncle Ben. But my father insisted I did. He said my Uncle Ben died when he was 35 of a heart attack on a golf course the day before my father's wedding to his first wife, Argene. Jim's mother is Argene. Julie, Carter, and I belong to my father's second wife, Pansy, just to clear things up. I asked why my father had never brought him up, but he said there was no need to. Any time that doll showed up in my arms, Uncle Ben was standing behind me with a kind and warm smile on his face. I don't remember getting the doll, and my old parents couldn't remember how I came to possess it, until last month. As it turns out, the doll belonged to my grandmother. She was a medium and a tarot card reader. It was passed to my mother, Pansy, but she never played with dolls and must have given it to me. Upon finding this out, I contacted my father, and he laughed on the other end of the phone. We carried on a conversation, me in Ohio, him in Florida. We talked for an hour or so, until Odile came into the living room. After a few mommies, I finally asked her why she was interrupting me. She said, "Judy's back and I don't like her. She keeps singing to me and she isn't very good." Then Odile looked to her side and brought her fingers to her lips. "Hush, Judy, go away. I told you I'd tell my mother on you if you kept this up." I just smiled because Odile has dozens of imaginary friends. Dadina is her imaginary school teacher. Justine is a mean imaginary girl who picks on her if she eats her vegetables, which is her excuse not to eat them. Zori is her imaginary boyfriend when they aren't fighting. The voice on the other line said, "Oh, I see Odile is playing with Judy." I laughed and thought that obviously Odile had called him and told him about her newest imagination. I just agreed and carried on. That was when my father stepped out of the bathroom and asked who I was talking to. I had forgotten. He had flown over with my mother to stay with us for the week. So, who was the person I was talking to? I don't know, because the line went dead. I realized that I was on my old teenage phone again, the one I had left down in Florida. In Odile's hand was that doll. I remember telling Odile to drop that thing and that it wasn't welcome in this house. "It's okay, Mommy. This doll won't hurt anyone." I asked her if the doll was Judy. "Once," Odile said, "before she got out." "Got out of what?" I'd asked her. An insane asylum? Prison? What? "Out of the doll, silly!" Jor moved back into the house, and since then Odile seems to have misplaced the doll. But my old phone shows up time and time again and rings even though the wire has been snapped long ago. I'm afraid of this Judy my youngest daughter keeps talking to. Orva has claimed to have seen her once too, in the living room, talking to Odile in a very low whisper. I honestly need help here since I am unfamiliar with anything paranormal. I just don't know what to do.